Hello and welcome to Circle Time, the Early Years podcast. I'm Glenn Denny. My guest on this edition of the podcast has 30 years experience within the early years sector and is now a consultant and an award-winning trainer. And trust me, I can see it because the certificate's right behind it. Working with nurseries and schools across the UK, their passion and specialism for understanding and acceptance for neurodiversity within early years is impactful and definitely comes from the heart as a professional and also as a parent of two neurodivergent children. They're an advocate for true inclusive practice, enabling all children to be heard, to be given the tools and connections to thrive and to be celebrated and accepted for their uniqueness. Welcome to the podcast, Cheryl Warren.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Cheryl, it's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, so we were just having a little chat, but obviously before we started recording, you were saying as well, we were talking about neuroscience and the brain and everything else. And, you were saying about, what I was saying about children like my 2-year-olds when they're having a little bit of a meltdown. And you're saying it's the same for you with your children as well. So is that kind of where this passion stemmed from, was your children?
In essence, yes. Like you said in the introduction, I've been around a while. I've done lots and lots of different things over my 30 years, and have worked with children with extreme complex needs, children who are have kind of different kind of elements to their development. And so I kind of chipped in terms of special needs. But when I had my now nearly 16-year-old, things became very real for us as a family. I identified William's autistic traits probably around 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't necessarily following, you kind of have that kind of checklist in your head, don't you? No eye contact, limited or kind of intermittent language, struggles with social experiences and social situations and things. And there were some things where I think, yeah, okay, or actually I think there are some potential things that I need to be aware of here with him and the way that I'm kind of seeing his development go. But then he would be extremely articulate in a group of adults, and he would give amazing eye contact. I think, oh no, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just having I'm kind of looking for something, or no, actually, it's just a kind of phase he's going through, or and then it just became more and more apparent. And then within his nursery, he was with a childminder in his earliest years when I was back at school, back when I was back at work. And then he moved into a school-based nursery, and it was the nursery teacher that pulled me over one day, and she said, William's doing really, really well. He's progressing well, and we're really happy and we're really pleased. But he doesn't play with anybody. He doesn't really engage with the other children. He seems quite happy, but there is no connection with the other children. And I kind of just nodded and went, yeah. That's because that's what I was seeing when we were out and about at kind of social events or parties or things like that. But I very much kept it inside. And I talk a lot about the kind of parenting journey of becoming aware of your own personal experiences and personal link to neurodivergence. And I very much kept it in because for me, I kind of knew he was autistic, but if I said it out loud, that was really scary. That was quite a kind of raw emotion, very real. And to say it out loud meant that I was acknowledging it to the world, and I wasn't really ready for that. So I talk a lot when I'm delivering sessions and talking to educators, and people say to me, oh, the parents are in denial. They don't want to talk about it. And that's them making it really tricky for us to make any referrals and I kind of talk very much about that parenting journey. And we have to provide a basis where those parents feel safe enough to talk to you when they're ready, and through that really kind of trusting relationship, because I wasn't ready to kind of say it out loud. But when it came to the point, and I did, it was I had a great family GP who had I'd been to as a child, and I felt I could trust. And I went and had a conversation with my GP, who made the referral to CAMS, and within a year, and I'm very aware that that's not a very long time frame these days, with parents kind of knocking on the door of 2-3 years of a diagnosis. But remember, this was back in This was back in 2012, 13. So this was a long time ago. William's nearly 16. And so it became very real. We had the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, as well as sensory processing disorder as well. And then, as you do as a parent, you start kind of Googling everything, because you're not really given a lot of support and guidance by professionals out there, unfortunately. And then work kind of just pulled me in that direction. I kind of was gravitating. I think personal life and kind of professional life was very much following the same kind of trajectory. And as I was learning more about William, I was kind of finding my way into those roles. So I became a Senko, lead Senko, and then people were starting to come to me and saying, Cheryl, we've got this child showing these traits, displaying this behavior. I'm not really sure what to do. And then that's when I thought, actually, there seems to be more need out there for support and guidance and advice and some direction, I think. And so I set up my own company. And so I'm now fortunate enough to be working all over the country with settings and doing just that. So looking at environments, looking at how we respond to children's behavior, understanding that neurodivergent behavior, what that behavior means, understanding the link to sensory input and behavior for many of our children. A high proportion of our autistic children have sensory processing disorder. So the two kind of go hand in hand, and quite often it's the first one that we identify with regards to behaviors. You know, the children put their hands over their ears when the room gets too noisy, or trying to run out of a space if it's too crowded or too busy. So yeah, they kind of both kind of went down the same path, really, and kind of one fed the other, and now the other is feeding the one. Do you know what I mean? They kind of work, hand in hand. So I very much share my personal story as a parent. And I have, you know, William's input quite often in sharing his story as well. And then with my youngest son, it was identified during lockdown that we started to identify possible dyslexic traits. And then so we went down the route of assessment for him. And so he's dyslexic. So yeah, both my children are very different, are very unique, are very wonderful, but both have differing neurodivergent conditions. So yeah, they go hand in hand very much.
Yeah, I think as well. I mean, I think, like you said there, your kind of journey into this to specializing in it has come from a very personal point of view. It's interesting though. Do you think that's where not just early years educators, but like parents as well have latched on? Actually, you're the one that you stood up there above the parapet and gone, well, this is my story. Do you think that's helped parents kind of open up about their own journeys as well? Because it can be very, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the right word, not shaming, isn't it? But it's almost like, well, you know, you don't know what to do, so we're just going to hide away because we don't know what to do and we're not given the guidance. Do you think that's kind of relevant for parents?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a very emotive subject. And I think with the likes of social media and this wonderful Instagram life that everybody has, you know, all of the parents over Christmas and all the families over Christmas putting up pictures of, you know, children loving family events and all sitting there in their all, you know, same pajamas and having these wonderful photos and these wonderful shots of how life is. You know, whilst I've spent many a Christmas having conversations with family and friends as to why, you know, William's eating Christmas dinner up in his room and he won't come down because we've got lots of people, although he knows the people that are in his house, there's too many people in his house and he now can't cope with it. And, you know, so it is. And certainly when I talk at some of the big events and when I'm sharing my story in training sessions, and I can deliver sessions to big groups of people, but also preschools where there are 8 members of staff, and more often than not there are parents of neurodivergent children within the cohort of people that I'm talking to, and they are the ones at the end of the session that come over to me and are in tears or are just grateful to have had somebody that gets it. And you know, I've kind of hugged it out more often than not with people that I'm chatting to, and I think it's very emotive. And I think for some people, they've said to me, you've given me the strength to say, I need to do this differently. I need to seek support. My child needs me to be their advocate. And that's what it is. You know, I've learned so much from my children, and the fight is real for parents like me. And you know, and I'm in a situation where, yes, I have two neurodivergent children, and yes, I know it's very relative, but there are families out there that are fighting a bigger fight than I've had to. But it's still a fight. And you know, when William first got his diagnosis, we were given some leaflets. That was it. Off you go. And it was actually my fantastic neighbour down the road. Her children they're not autistic, but that she has a couple of children with quite complex needs. And she had a caseworker from the local authority already linked with her as a family. And I went down and had a cup of tea with her and chatted over things with her and cried with her. And she said, I'll help you. I'll help you. And it was on a day when her caseworker was coming to visit her at home. She marched her to my front door and said, I'm not leaving here until you speak to Cheryl and you offer her some support, because I had tried to reach out to people and you get nothing. Yeah. And it was my neighbour that said, go and help this family because they need you. So you do have to put your head above the parapet, and you do have to fight a system that at the moment, and I talk very openly about our education system not being fit for purpose for children like mine, because my children are not fitting this neat little box. And you know, they're not necessarily going to, you know, they will do amazing. Of course they will, and they will be whoever they want to be, and they will succeed at whatever they want to succeed in. But they're not necessarily fitting that box of compliance. They're not necessarily fitting that box of the education movement. And I've had to do a lot of work with and lots of meetings and lots of discussions with my children's teachers, Senkos, to kind of say, look, we need to look at this differently. My children need something different from you. You know, classic with William at primary school, Senko told me that in order to get support, he needs to throw a few more chairs around the classroom. And I said, that, how does that help me? How does that help William? Whereas with Stanley, my youngest, this year, I've had a really great connection with his teacher. And we had the conversation that in order to support Stanley, he needs to trust you. He needs that trusting, safe environment, as many of our children do. So for the teacher, for him, he's currently in year 4. I spoke a lot with him about, you know, get to know Stanley, get Stanley to trust you, get Stanley for you, you know, if you carry out your promises, if you support him, he will then flourish. And he needs that constant reassurance from you, that constant praise, the kind of carrot and stick thing. The stick doesn't work. The stick doesn't work with him, because he then shies away. We had some school refusal for a while because he didn't feel like he was in a space where he felt safe enough to put his hand up to ask for help. And he's now, you know, reading sections from the books in front of the class. You know, that was what he was doing by the end of last term, because he felt that he was in a safe space with his teacher. He still crumbles on the days when he has a supply teacher or a cover teacher, and he comes home and he has a meltdown because it's been a bad day, because that person has not helped him or said, you know, it's there, read it. Well, he can't read the instruction. He's not understanding the processing of that instruction. Is not going in for him. So he needs that little bit more. So it's the fight. And I think that's where, you know, parents at the end of my sessions, you know, parents of neurodivergent children will just say, thank you for giving me the strength to push and to question and to ask and to seek support and guidance, because it's not, and I get follow-up emails and follow-up conversations from parents just saying, you know, I've had this conversation, but this is what they told me. What should I do next? And how can I help? You know, how can I continue that advocacy for my child? And, you know, it's a inner strength that you have to find, because the system is broken.
Yeah. I mean, I can 100% relate to that. I'm sitting there listening to you go, I've got a child in a setting that I worked in, and we knew something wasn't quite right. yeah, there was something not quite fitting in with him, and it was ringing alarm bells with all of us. And it was like, we need help and support for this child, but it's having to push and push and push to a system that's overstretched, it's overworked, it's underfunded. You know, all the keywords that are still going around now, like years later, everything's overworked, underfunded, understaffed, everything. And yet we're still having to, but we kept pushing and kept pushing and kept pushing. And eventually we got support in place for this child.
Mhm.
And, you know, it was just something that was like, why are we having to bash our heads against the wall? If, you know, as professionals in early years, we should be able to turn around to another professional that works in, you know, educational psychology or whatever teams that there are and say, look, could you come and have a look at this child? We're not sure what it is. We can't quite put our finger on it. You're the expert in this. Please come and help. And they're like, well, we could maybe come and see. It's like, no, don't just fob us off. Look, we're serious. We're trying to support a child. I think, you know, it is so frustrating that we're trying to do our best for the children, and there's just not enough support out there.
No, there isn't. And it's, you know, it's frustrating, and it's not the fault of local authority. It's not the fault of the schools or the speech and language therapists, or it's the whole system in terms, like you say, funding, support. You reach out now, and because, you know, local authority advisors have left and they haven't been replaced,
Yeah.
or for some local authorities, I don't think necessarily their training and understanding is maybe as up to date as it could be. Certainly from this, you know, there is a massive movement now on this neuro-affirming practice, which you know, I kind of deliver on, and there are speech and language therapists that I always recommend that are, you know, pushing that neuro-affirming message. But like I say, that there's no funding, there's no staff. We still have a staffing crisis within early years. You can't get the funding for one-to-one. Children are being turned away because staff are saying we cannot take this child on because of, you know, various different reasons. But I always say you're still going to have little George knocking on your door at 8 o'clock Wednesday morning. So what can you do now? And that's where, you know, people, you know, on my training, it's giving people the skills so that people don't have to necessarily wait and rely on those other professionals coming in. It's giving people the skills, the knowledge, the strength to say, actually, we need to provide the most effective neuro-affirming support for George today to ensure that he feels safe enough to be his true, authentic self, so that we understand his stims, we understand how to respond effectively to his meltdowns, we understand his sensory profile so that we can prevent a possible meltdown, which then makes all of the staff feel that they are better able to support George, so that then mum, dad, grandma is not getting a constant daily phone call, oh, George has done this today, or George has had this meltdown today, or whatever it might be. It's giving the educators the skills to support the children today, right now, whilst they are still waiting for support and guidance from those external services. Because having a diagnosis opens great doors for funding and other support. But we need to be supporting and enabling the child in front of us. It's not about, oh, we can't do, and I hear it often, you know, we can't do anything because parents are in denial, or we can't get the services, so therefore we can't get the diagnosis. It's only when we get the diagnosis we can offer the support. No, because actually many of our children will leave our setting before they get a diagnosis or before they get any support. Because for a lot of our neurodivergent children, we're not going to be picking up those indicators of those early traits until they are, you know, 2.5, 3. So for many of our children, we may only have another year, 18 months of them with us. And given the current waiting lists, they're going to have left us. So how can we get to know George right now in terms of his behaviours, his sensory profile, how his neurodivergent condition presents for him, and then ensure that the whole team are supporting George right now, whilst you have in the background that referral and those kind of support services coming in.
You're going through that system,
yeah, absolutely. So it's upskilling, it's identifying your own gaps in your own CPD with regards to neurodivergent conditions, and how best to support our children in that neuro-affirming way, so that we are not expecting our children to be school ready. We are not pushing our children to be more neurotypical. We are allowing our children to be their true authentic self and providing that safe space where our children can thrive.
I think that's so important. It's one of those, when I've been talking to various people through the podcast, and everyone's got a different skill set, obviously. But it's interesting to think is that I often think that early years educator training actually doesn't cover even the basics of what we need to know. Like, for example, it doesn't cover working with children under the age of 2. It doesn't really cover, it doesn't cover working with neurodivergent children. It doesn't cover so much. And again, it's the upskilling, and that has a huge cost as well. But it's things like that we're seeing. I mean, I don't know if you'd agree, and please tell me to be quiet if I'm saying it wrong, but there seems to be more children being diagnosed as being neurodivergent, or we're becoming more aware of it, maybe is a better way of phrasing that. And that means that the staff and practitioners need that training and that support to be able, like you say, from day one of little George coming into nursery, he needs to be supported. He needs to know that this is a place for him and we're here for him. And it's one of those bits that staff need to be able to access that training.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm an assessor and have been on the level 2, level 3, and now focus just on the level 4 Senko qualification. But the level 3, it has now a SEND unit, but SEND is huge. And people say to me quite often, "Oh, Cheryl, you're the SEND expert," and I say, "No, I'm not, because SEND is massive. I focus on one element of it." But you're right, there are more children coming through with undiagnosed or diagnosed neurodivergent conditions. And it's not that, oh, okay, well, where have they all been? Why now? Our children have always been there. It's just like you say, we're now more aware. And there's lots of training out there around autism awareness training. And yes, we can be aware. But for me, it's moving that awareness to understanding.
Yeah.
So let's understand it. And then we need to then shift our understanding to acceptance and celebrating our neurodivergent children. It's that kind of stage process of our knowledge and our skills and our practice. Because once we know more, we can do more. And I think there is so much more out there. It's not only about, yes, I'd love to go in and train every single nursery across the country in order to do this, to offer this support for our children. But yes, again, there's no money. There's, some settings have limited budgets, and that's okay. But there is lots more out there. There are podcasts like this one. I've just started one. There are other people that are throwing out lots and lots of free content, lots and lots of free support and advice. Start there. Start to build up. Start to kind of, with your foundational knowledge on neurodiversity in early years, autism understanding and acceptance, awareness of ADHD and PDA and all these other conditions that we're seeing our children come through in our settings with now. But the training is not working. And then when you shift into schools, you can have somebody that an adult who has completed a degree on geography or history and then decides that they want to become a teacher, have had no connection, no experience of working with children. They go and do their PGCE year, which is fantastic. They get one afternoon on SEND in that year, one afternoon. That is it. And that is on SEND. So when I'm going into schools and I'm talking to them about their classroom environments, and we're talking about flexibility and delivery, and we're talking about children over here sitting on a bouncy ball to kind of help their proprioceptive input so that they can focus. We've got talking about having a kind of place of escape for children that need to just take themselves away for a moment because things have got too much. We're talking about sensory diets for children to be able to leave the classroom with an adult who understands that that child needs that movement, where children need their fidgets with them. And it's not a case of, well, you can't have your fidget too because it's too distracting. it's all of that understanding that provides this safe space for our children, where, like, you were saying at the beginning, where George feels that this is a space for him, where our children feel that they belong, where they can be themselves with I've heard it before where educators have been told to stop a child from stimming because they're not going to be able to do that at school. Our children need to stim, like you and I need to breathe or scratch an itch. Our children need to stim. It's a regulatory behavior. It's something that will support them to keep calm, to keep regulated, or it's a way of showing their excitement and their enthusiasm for something. Yeah. Don't stop it. It's something that they have no control over stopping or not stopping. So it's that understanding across the board, like I say, moving our awareness to understanding and then acceptance that this is who George is, and we will celebrate who George is for exactly who he is, to enable him to thrive within our spaces. But yeah, it has to start with the training and the understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I know, like past experience for me as well. There was the child in one setting I was at. She was just brilliant. I just loved her to pieces. But she was very heavily on the spectrum. So many of these traits, she was very much like in her own little bubble, nobody else around her. It got to the stage where I got a connection with her, that she would hold her hand or come and take my hand to take me somewhere. And I was like, "You've accepted me into your world. Thank you." That was just wonderful. But at the same time, I had a member of, one of my colleagues couldn't quite grasp what was going on. And if this particular child wanted to do a certain thing and it was just their thing, that's fine, that's okay. They're not hurting anybody else. They just want to go to this space, and that's where they wanted to go because everything was too busy around them and they just wanted to be somewhere quiet. That's fine. This is when they would take my hand and drag me off there. But this other member of staff just couldn't grasp that. And I'm like, and this is where the frustration was coming. It's like, why are we not getting the training on this? I mean, I was lucky. The local authority I was working with did autism awareness training, and it was brilliant. It was done over a couple of weeks in an evening class. Best training I've done, and unfortunately they just don't do it anymore. Like, funding has cut it right back and it's gone. And I'm like, why? This was like the best training. It started off with, this room full of noise and distraction. People were throwing stuff at you and waving cloths in front of your face and all this loud music and banging of pots and pans. And it was horrible. And I like, children with autism are facing this every day. So much overstimulation. No wonder they're having it. But now they just don't do that training, because otherwise I'd have said, right, why don't you go and do that training? Because that will open your eyes to how this little girl is doing and why she maybe doesn't trust you as much as she trusts me. I get what's going on with her. And I've taken the time to actually understand her. And I think that's an important bit as well, is taking the time to understand them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we have to start with the environment. We have to look at, the sensory impact of the environment. So I do get educators to do a mini environmental audit and kind of look at the smells, the sounds, the touch points, the kind of visual stimulus, even putting the Alexa on for the tidy up time song. If we've got children that are tidying up because it's tidying up time for lunchtime, so we've got hungry children, so we've got empty bellies, so that's impacting the nervous system. We've got this whole excitement we might have if you're thinking about your kind of 2-3 year olds. You've got children that are now getting tired because they're hungry and it's nearly bedtime. So we've got children that might be getting upset. We've got the hustle and bustle of people moving boxes and chairs and tables and scraping those around on the floor. We've got more movement in the room because people are kind of, I can see that piece on the floor, because the educator at the front has kind of said, everybody go and find something on the floor to tidy away. So there's this kind of really kind of busy movement. We've got the smell of the fish pie cooking next door in the kitchen. Then we put the Alexa on for the tidy up song, and you're wondering why George is in the corner, crouching in the fetal position, potentially screaming or wanting to run out of the door. And you're going over to George saying, come on, George, everybody needs to tidy up now. This is too much for George. George is now in a stress state, fight or flight response, because his body and his brain, his nervous system has gone, this is not a safe space to be. You need to get out of here in order for you to keep safe. we need to consider everything that's going on in our spaces in terms of the impact of the environment on our children. Because once we do, we can remove potential triggers for our children. And then the next thing is understanding neurodivergent play. Our children play, they just play differently. So if you see I'm really sorry we're using George. If you have a George, I'm sorry, we're kind of related. That was the first name I thought of. But if we've got George, and George is kind of flitting around different activities, or he is playing with the cars or the dinosaurs over and over and over and again, and repeating his play. It's not a case of, oh, come over here, George, come and play over here, come and do this with us over here, George. He's playing. Join him in his play. Validate his play. Copy, mimic, follow his lead. You will build that connection, which will build trust. And then you'll develop this amazing relationship where you may well then be able to support George to try something new because he trusts you.
Yeah.
But understand that neurodivergent play is play, and join it. Don't try to put your own neurotypical play agenda onto that child. Follow it. Allow that child to lead it, and you will find an amazing connection through that if you join them where they are.
I think that is such an important thing, and for me, that's my understanding. So, like, I will join them where they are, and like I said about this child that I had before, when she took my hand to take me somewhere, I was like, I built your trust. Thank you. That was so important to me that I'd spent that time. I didn't jump in and try and push my way into her play. I stood on the background. I was just there. I was nearby, and I would just maybe commentate on something that she was doing. I wasn't jumping in and to take over or to play with her. I was just there in the background, and then I moved a little bit further forward. The more that I did that, the more she began to realize that I'm not a threat to her world. I'm not going to make her do stuff she doesn't want to do. I'm actually doing what she's doing, and it's like, okay, yeah, you're all right. I will trust you, and that's so important. I think if we did that and took the time to work with and build the trust with our children, then it goes for any child, really, not just any neurodivergent child. Any child, we build their trust, then they will come to us. They know that we are safe, and that's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Meet them where they are. Enter their world. Don't expect them to enter yours.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Cheryl, time has crept up on us. I can't believe it. But I just want to say,
it's gone really quickly.
I know it does. But definitely, if you fancy come back as a guest again, I would love that. But Cheryl Warren, thank you so very much for being on Circle Time.
Thank you very much for having me.